If you're after a cracking new camera phone that won't absolutely knacker your savings, well, get ready to smash that like button because this video is going to be right up your alley hole. Quite a lot of the latest mid-range smartphones boast a proper flexible camera setup to rival those wallet-draining flagships, including clever image processing, a proper bit of zoom action, and the obligatory AI editing chicanery. And I've reviewed absolutely loads of these affordable gits, so here's my pick of the very best mid-range camera phones right now. And for more on the latest and greatest tech, please do subscribe, ding that old notifications bell. Cheers! Now, one of my favourite mid-range smartphones in 2025 is Google's Pixel 9a, a flawed but still all-round solid pocket filler boasting a slick AI-drenched stock Android experience. From the excellent battery life to the bright and punchy 6.3-inch screen, there's an awful lot to admire here, as long as you're not put off by the chunky bezels, the less than stellar gaming performance, and a few other wee quirks. And while the camera setup isn't quite as capable as the regular Pixel 9, the photos pumped out by the Pixel 9a are still proper impressive at this price. And what you've got on here is a 48 meg quad PD shooter with optical image stabilization, which appears to be the same tech as was packed into the Pixel 9 Pro Fold. That's backed by a 13 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter. Now, of course, there's no telephoto shooter on here, just as with the regular Pixel 9, but you do get up to 8 times super res zoom, as Google calls it. And fair play, Google's image processing produces some reasonably crispy pics when you are maxed out at 8 times zoom. While for the first time on an A-series Google smartphone, you've also got a bit of macro action. Now, the Pixel 9 and those Pro phones generally capture slightly crispier details versus the Pixel 9a, especially if you switch on the high-res mode, which is missing in action on the more budget-friendly model. And even though the Pixel 9a can capture macro shots just like its brothers here, that focus will fail if you get a bit too close to your subject. You'll notice you get this move back to improve focus message quite a lot, while the others can get to almost touching distance with sharp results. Now, I certainly saw more lens flaring on the Pixel 9a pics in sunnier times, which is rare to non-existent on the others, while the Pixel 9a can also slightly saturate with brighter scenes, and the others spaff out gloriously bold and natural looking tones. And you know what, despite sporting a different sensor for the ultra-wide angle snapper, the Pixel 9a actually holds up pretty well against the others for detail and colour capture. So the obvious difference between these blowers is that telephoto shooter, which is confined to the Pro phones. This allows you to punch in up to 30 times compared with the 8 times cap on the Pixel 9a and 9, with far sharper results. Now, all 4 of these Pixel blowers boast the usual AI photo tools such as Add Me, which allows you to insert yourself into a previously taken photo. And of course the Magic Editor, which can spruce up your photo in all kinds of clever arse ways, such as the Auto Frame tool. This can actually pull back further, artificially filling in the border of the photo if you want, otherwise crop in a bit. Here in Blighty, the Sky feature is particularly handy to make everything look a bit less grey and cack. And then for your video type shenanigans, you can shoot up to 4K resolution footage. There's no 8K upscaling option or anything like that here. You can boost the frame rate up to 60 frames per second if you like. And again, the 9a certainly seems up to the job, but stay tuned for that full review for my thoughts on how good it is at capturing home movies. And then up front on the Pixel 9a, you've got yourself a 13 megapixel selfie shooter, which again can capture 4K resolution home movies. The stabilization seems pretty good. You've got a dual mic setup, which does a respectable job of picking up your voice. So again, certainly seems absolutely fine for your simple vlogging efforts, bit of Skyping, not Skyping for much longer, actually, Zooms and Teams and whatever. A lot of video chat type stuff. Now, another decent mid-range choice is the Nothing Phone 3a Duo. This smartphone pair may be proper bricks, but they sure do stand out from the crowd with their spangly disco arse action, as well as that undeniably unique launcher. Movie fans will spooge themselves senseless at the gorgeous OLED screen and the respectable stereo speaker setup, as will any gamers out there. And aye, thanks to the Snapdragon smarts, the Nothing Phone 3a and the 3a Pro are both beefy enough to handle a bit of Wuthering Waves action. But best of all, Nothing's camera setup is impressively flexible, although this is the one area where the 3a Pro massively differentiates itself from the regular Nothing Phone 3a. Now you do once again have a 50 megapixel main shooter, but it's using Samsung's GN9 DL sensor versus the Pro's larger Samsung GNJ sensor. And I have found in my time with these phones that the Pro model tends to produce brighter, more saturated shots versus the cheaper 3A, most often when there's quite strong contrast. You got more of an iPhone-y kind of vibe overall, which no doubt a lot of people will prefer. That said, a few of my 3A snaps flipped the script just to be awkward, while colours are bold and pack a proper punch on both of these. And both nothing blowers are solid enough for portrait shots as well, although the Pro seems to nail skin tones slightly more accurately. The good news is, despite the difference in sensor size, the regular phone 3A is just as respectable for ambient snaps as the Pro, although when things get proper dim, the Pro model is slightly superior, especially when you're zooming in. So what you've got here on the regular Nothing Phone 3A is a 50 megapixel Samsung GN5 telephoto shooter, 50mm equivalent, with 2 times optical zoom and sadly bugger all optical image stabilization. And that's compared with the Pro's 50 meg Sony Lightyear 900 sensor, a 70mm equivalent with 3 times optical zoom, and this appears to upgrade to OIS as well. Now if you zoom in beyond the sort of 4 to 5 times level, the difference is quite clear between this pair. You'll get pleasingly crispy shots from the Pro, while things get a bit more hazy quite quickly on the regular 3A with a lack of finer detail. And at night times you'll have to be extremely still with the 3A, as that lack of optical image stabilization means you'll get blur with even the slightest hand tremor. And the 3A, just like the Pro, packs the same 8meg IMX355 ultra-wide shooter, with identical results no matter the time of day. Both are absolutely fine for a mid-ranger, although tones do tend to get much warmer, while low-light results are a bit more murky. And the Nothing Phone 3A boasts the same overall enjoyable camera experience as the 3A Pro. You can drag down a whole bunch of toggles, including the ability to bump up to a high-res mode on demand. You've also got a bunch of filters you can play around with, otherwise you can add your own using a LUT file. And all the bonus modes you'd expect to find on a modern mobile, including a bit of expert action. If you want to tinker around with the likes of the ISO levels, the shutter speed, etc. You can capture in RAW if you like. And for your home movie type shenanigans, exactly the same again as the Nothing Phone 3A Pro. You can shoot up to 4K resolution footage at 30 frames per second, otherwise 1080p Full HD footage at 30 or 60 FPS. And no major issues, just like the Pro. Stabilization's pretty respectable. The audio pickup's still quite clear even when things get a bit gusty. Although in low light the 3A does once again stumble with some focal issues and rather murky visuals. As for the selfie cams, well, it's a case of 32 meg here on the Nothing Phone 3A versus 50 meg on the Nothing Phone 3A Pro. The 3A, you can still record up to Full HD resolution footage at 30 or 60 frames per second. There's no 4K option, but the stabilization's pretty good. The audio pickup's absolutely fine. So it's certainly fine for all your video chat shenanigans. And now let's take a squint at Samsung and its Galaxy A56 mid-ranger, which looks not too dissimilar to the S25, but thankfully won't molest your wallet quite so aggressively, even if that price has bumped right up versus the previous generation. This sleek-looking smartphone boasts a water and scratch-resistant design, plus a knee-trembling AMOLED screen, generous helping storage, and so many years of OS updates that we'll probably all be living in underground bunkers having regular punch-ups with mutant rats before this thing is finally out of support. It's just a shame that there's no microSD support anymore, and the gaming chops aren't much cop. But of course the camera tech is pretty solid, and in some ways actually better than Samsung's recent flagship phones. And the specs certainly sound very familiar compared with last year's Galaxy A55. You've got a 50 meg primary shooter with optical image stabilization backed by a 12 megapixel ultra-wide angle shooter and the obligatory 5 megapixel macro snapper too. Now, Samsung's made a few tweaks and improvements for its camera app in 2025. So for instance, you can quickly access your main toggles and modes down here at the bottom, including boosting to high-res 50 megapixel mode and turning on the old motion photo. And of course, all the usual camera modes, including the obligatory fun mode. It's just so fun, I might have to go blow my own brains out because I can't imagine life getting any better than this. And of course, the usual fan favourites, including single take and a good bit of pro action as well. But this past week I just stuck with the regular photo mode like most folk will do, and I found my test shots with the A56 came out pretty well on the whole. Those pics are packed with fine detail on the default 12 meg mode, as long as you got enough light, while this mid-ranger can also cope pretty well with HDR type situations. You will get the usual Samsung brightening and colour boost shenanigans, but not too many of my photos were obviously oversaturated, and most people seem to like the effect regardless. It was only really the occasional focus fail that let the A56 down, but this did happen more than expected. Samsung says that it's worked on improving portrait shots with enhanced skin tones, sky, grass, etc., although I struggled to see the difference between this and earlier models. And as usual, any motion is likely to give you a blurry pic, so you'll have to time your shots well, although the edge detection is generally decent. And somewhat counterintuitively, I actually saw a lot less noise in low light and high contrast situations with the A56 versus the S25 lot. My night snaps looked impressively bright and not really very grainy. As for the macro shooter, well, as always, that's just a bit cack really. And the ultra-wide shooter ain't brilliant either, certainly stumbles when the lighting conditions are less than perfect. As for shooting video, well, you can capture 4K footage at 30 frames per second, no 60 FPS option there. You'll have to drop the resolution to Full HD if you want to boost it to 60 FPS. And I found the Galaxy A56 attempts at video capture weren't too bad at all. Again, you'll see some saturation when the sun is shining, and the focus occasionally took a wee bit longer than expected to lock onto a subject. But the stabilization's pretty decent, video quality's reasonably sharp at 4K, and I had no problems with the audio either, although I didn't get the chance to test the A56 in gusty conditions, because the weather here has been surprisingly unsucky. And then finally for the camera tech, around front you've got yourself your basic bog standard 12 megapixel selfie shooter with the ability to pull back a bit for those group shots. And the Samsung Galaxy A56 can shoot up to 4K resolution footage at 30 frames per second or 60 FPS option using that front-facing camera. It's not quite as good as some rivals, but absolutely fine for your video chats. As you can hear, mic picking up absolutely fine. The stability is good, and the overall visuals are absolutely fine. And of course, you've got the usual obligatory AI photo editing tools slapped on here as well, although this has been a wee bit bulky for me here on the A56. So for instance, as you can see there, if I try and get the object eraser on the go, basically just says, "Nah mate, not today." Now Samsung also offers the slightly cheaper Galaxy A36 if your budget is tighter than a guppy's bumhole. This is another water-resistant blower with a bright AMOLED screen, stereo speakers, fantastic battery life, and yes, the same shonky performance. But that camera setup is once again dependable, especially considering the price. And it's very similar specs to the previous A35, so what you got here is a 50 megapixel primary shooter with optical image stabilization built in, as well as a basic 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter, and the obligatory pointless 5 megapixel macro shooter. I do rather like the latest incarnation of Samsung's camera app because it's pretty simple and straightforward to use. You've got all your main toggles right here at the bottom now, so it is a lot more one-handed friendly. You can quickly and easily slap on the high resolution mode if you want to. You've got the likes of motion photo, change up the contrast levels, and you can also apply a filter, including your own custom filter, which you can create using any image you got stored on the Galaxy A36, be it a photo you've taken yourself or one which you've merely downloaded. Just select part of the image to use as the basis for the filter. And as you can see there, we've got a lovely reddy hue now. Otherwise, we can choose a completely different image and get a completely different effect. And again, if we just focus in on the deep blues down here in the bottom corner, doesn't have quite the desired effect. It mostly seems to have just whitewashed the image, but hey ho. The good news is you can then manually tweak the likes of the color temperature, the contrast, the saturation levels to really get the kind of effect you were hoping for. And of course, you've got the usual selection of bonus modes, including portrait mode, a good bit of fun action. I hope you're having fun right now, because I'm certainly, oh my god, I've got fun gushing out of every orifice. You've got Samsung standards like the single take mode, of course, and the dedicated pro mode as well if you want to piddle about with the likes of the ISO levels, the EV, etc. But just on the regular photo mode, you're generally guaranteed some pretty decent looking photos. Certainly not too bad at all for a mid-ranger like this. The A36 can cope quite admirably with strong contrast. It does tend to brighten and saturate images still like other Samsung smartphones, and in low light you will get plenty of noise, but it'll do a job. And if you like to shoot a bit of home movie action on the go, where you can record up to 4K resolution footage at 30 frames per second, there's no 60 FPS option unless you bump the resolution down to full HD. And as long as you're not trying to shoot in quite dim lighting, then the Galaxy A36 again does a pretty decent job. Its visuals are fine again, strong contrast, not really an issue. The stabilization is pretty good and the audio pickup's decent as well. Get a bit of wind feedback and some other issues, but overall quite clear and crisp. And then hey, around front you've got yourself a 12 megapixel selfie camera, which is certainly a downgrade in terms of specs compared with the previous generation. I find it's absolutely fine for your everyday selfies. The portrait smarts are pretty good. And of course you can once again use that fun mode. So much fun! And once again, you can record up to 4K resolution footage at 30 frames per second, not 60 FPS, using that front-facing selfie cam, again with pretty decent stabilization and clear audio pickup, so no real issues there. Although yes, once again, in quite low light, it does kind of look a bit grainy and poo. Now, I'm a big fan of the OnePlus 13, but let's face it, it ain't quite as affordable as some of those classic back-in-the-day OnePlus blowers. If you can't quite afford a OnePlus 13, well, maybe have a gander at the OnePlus 13R instead, which lops off some of the shinier, fancier bits for a more affordable asking price. You've still got yourself a massive battery that fills up quicker than a portable piss cabin at a music festival, powerful Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 performance for your gaming needs, and the same excellent OxygenOS 15 experience. And sadly, that camera hardware from the OnePlus 13 has also been completely stripped out and replaced here on the OnePlus 13R, so it can't quite offer the same super flexible, super dependable experience as the flagship. And while you've got a similar setup in terms of telephoto shooter, ultra-wide-angle shooter, etc., it is very different camera hardware on this pair. So for instance, the primary shooter, 50 megapixel on both, but it is Sony's LYT700 sensor here on the OnePlus 13R versus the 808 on the OnePlus 13. And likewise for that telephoto shooter on the OnePlus 13, they stuck with the Sony sensor LYT600 with 3 times optical zoom, whereas on the OnePlus 13R that swapped out for a Samsung JN5 sensor with a mere 2 times optical zoom. The OnePlus 13R actually used that Samsung JN5 sensor for the ultra-wide-angle shooter. It's a 50 meg sensor, so you can get some pretty detailed macro and ultra-wide snaps. Whereas on the OnePlus 13R, you've just got yourself a basic 8 megapixel effort, which is kind of just there if you need it, I guess. Now the actual camera modes and features pretty similar on both of these smartphones, but as you can see you've got a dedicated macro shot mode here on the regular OnePlus 13 flagship, which you don't get on the OnePlus 13R. While the OnePlus 13 flagship also serves up a dedicated action mode, and it's definitely better at shooting living, moving subjects, kids, cats, etc., compared with the 13R. And while the flagship phone has that Hasselblad Master mode, complete with a bit of vignette action, you can mess around with the sharpness level, etc. You've got a more regular Pro mode here on the OnePlus 13R, but it still allows you to fiddle around with all the main stuff, the ISO levels, the white balance, etc. And once again, you can capture raw images. And the OnePlus 13 is certainly superior in some situations. The 13R struggles more in high contrast scenarios, with detail often lost and colours occasionally appearing saturated, while it also isn't as good for those up-close macro shenanigans, or of course those action snaps. But hey, if the lighting's decent, you'll still usually get a crispy pic, and while the telephoto camera can't zoom as far, it's still a useful addition. For your home movie needs, you can capture 4K resolution footage at up to 60 frames per second on the OnePlus 13R, just like the OnePlus 13, although sadly no Dolby Vision smarts. But hey, I still found that the video I shot on the OnePlus 13R looked pretty slick. Things don't get too soft or grainy when the lighting conditions aren't ideal. That audio capture absolutely fantastic from all directions as well. Now the OnePlus 13 flagship sports a 32 megapixel selfie shoot, and you can once again shoot 4K resolution footage at 60 frames per second with Dolby Vision support. Very swanky pants indeed.
With the OnePlus 13R, it is a slightly more pared back 16 megapixel selfie shooter. And no, you don't have those 4K 60 FPS smarts. Unfortunately, this tops off at full HD, and yeah, no Dolby Vision action on here at all. But you do have a triple mic setup. The audio capture just as clear as with the OnePlus 13 flagship phone. And the likes of stabilization and everything absolutely fine as well. And frankly, when you're shooting a mug like mine, I probably prefer full HD to 4K.
Of course, it ain't one of the cheapest mid-rangers around, so if you don't have quite enough funds for the OnePlus 13R, well, no worries, OnePlus has got you covered for pretty much any budget. So why not have a gander at the more affordable OnePlus Nord 5, which is an admittedly slightly disappointing sequel to last year's metal banger, the Nord 4, but it is still an impressive mid-ranger, no doubt. The OnePlus Nord 5 is a 6.83-inch mega twat boasting solid battery life with fast charging support. Plus you've got a lovely bit of Oxygen OS complete with that shiny new Plus key. Not to mention decent gaming features too, so it is just as well this phone can cope with some Genshin or Wuthering Waves action. Or if you want to save even more cash, there's always the even cheaper Nord CE5. And this trims the specs a wee bit, but also offers a few bonuses like expandable storage, as well as yet another respectable slice of camera tech. And on paper, the camera tech sounds very similar. You've got a 50 megapixel primary shooter on both, but it is the Sony LYT700 here on the Nord 5, whereas the Nord CE5 uses the older LYT600, while both also offer up a basic 8 megapixel ultra-wide angle shooter. And as with the displays, colours once again appear slightly warmer and bolder in photos shot on the Nord 5. The CE5 tends to brighten images with greater enthusiasm, which makes for a more iPhone-y style image instead. And I found that the Nord 5 also generally produced sharper looking snaps. And so personally for me, the Nord 5 is the winner hands down, but of course which one you prefer will come down to your own personal tastes. Typical YouTube cop-out there. And the actual camera app, pretty much an identical experience on both of these. You've got the same set of toggles and features, including, yes, a dedicated Pro mode, which has a lot of the same features, including a good bit of focus peaking action, but unfortunately you can only shoot RAW format here on the Nord 5. There is no RAW option on the Nord CE5. You of course have that dedicated portrait mode, and then if you flick to more, you do have a high-res mode in both as well, so you can capture photos at the full 50 megapixel resolution as long as the lighting conditions aren't too crap. And a couple of extra bits here on the Nord 5, including a long exposure mode. And of course, as is very much on vogue these days, you've got a bit of AI photo editing action with both as well. Basically the same set of features. So for instance, the AI recompose, which can just help to crop in towards your subject a bit and just reframe everything so it's a bit nicer. And you've also got AI detail boost as well, which can just make everything look a little bit finer, a little bit less fuzzy at times. And in the before and after, you can see it does make a slight difference. As for the video chops, well, both the Nord CE5 and the Nord 5 can capture 4K resolution Ultra HD footage at up to 60 frames per second. And both the OnePlus Nord CE5 and the OnePlus Nord 5 do a respectable job of shooting your everyday home movies. The visual clarity and everything pretty strong, of course, at that 4K Ultra HD level. The stabilization's pretty good. The audio pickups, fine. Nice and clear if you're actually shooting the video, providing a bit of commentary. It can peter out quite quickly when it's actually somebody talking who's facing the lenses. And then last up, you've got a basic 16 megapixel selfie shooter here on the OnePlus Nord CE5 that is upgraded to a 50 megapixel effort here on the OnePlus Nord 5. So you can capture yourself at 4K resolution, again at up to 60 frames per second using the Nord 5. That is limited to full HD resolution at 60 frames per second here on the Nord CE5. And certainly the Nord 5 better across a range of conditions for those selfie shenanigans, but both pretty capable when it comes to the likes of portrait shots. Here in the UK, one of the lesser known mid-range smartphone options is the OPPO Reno 13 Pro. But it is absolutely well worth a look, as it can smack the pants right off of quite a few flagship phones, all for a more palatable price. Performance is good enough for gaming, the battery life is excellent, ColorOS 15 is packed with useful features, And overall, it's just a really pleasing package. Helped along, of course, by a capable and flexible camera setup. And of course, that camera tech, not quite as advanced as what you'd find on the likes of the Fine X8 series, but pretty decent for a mid-range mobile. You've got yourself a 50 megapixel primary shooter with optical image stabilization, as well as another 50 meg sensor for the telephoto shooter, 3.5 times optical zoom. And last up, a pretty simple basic 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter. Got all the standard camera tools and features, including a bit of live photo action. Just helps to bring your photo gallery to life by capturing a wee bit of video before and after you hit that shutter button. You've got all of the obligatory camera modes, including an underwater mode, which you don't actually see too often, and a bit of pro action. So you can play around with the likes of the shutter speed, the EV levels, white balance, etc. Although no love for RAW in there, you do get a bit of interval shooting. But just like OPPO's Fine X8 phones before it, the true strength of this shooter is living subjects. Rivals like Samsung's Galaxy S25 blowers, the iPhone 16s, etc. usually fart out blurry, useless pics of more energetic, hyperactive subjects. But the Reno 13 Pro can once again capture beautifully crisp stills even when there's a fair bit of motion. And likewise, it's pretty bloody good for those portrait snaps, cleanly separating your subject from the background and smearing out all of the non-essential stuff with a pleasing bokeh style effect. And the OPPO Reno 13 Pro can also deal pretty well with strong contrast without oversaturating, blowing everything out like an iPhone or a Samsung will do. Colours are generally well represented as well, a bit warmer in more ambient conditions, and at night time I did see some lens flaring when there was some bright light involved, but thankfully the grain situation wasn't too bad. The Reno's telephoto shooter works well in daytime, offering sharper pics than what you'd get simply by cropping into your regular photos. You've also got some AI sharpening shenanigans to keep things manageable at the 10 times zoom level, although probably don't bother pinching in much more than that. The Reno 13 Pro won't stop going until you hit 120 times zoom, but well before that the image will look a bit melty. And also at night time that zoom is less effective, the picture quality gets kind of murky and fuzzy, so it's just best avoided if possible. And that 8 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter is there if you need it. Once again, it's a bit cacking low light, where you can also expect tonal accuracy to take a proper kick to the danglies, even when conditions are pretty good. And if you want to shoot a bit of home movie action, where you can record 4K resolution footage at up to 60 frames per second, and the results are quite similar to what you see on the Fine X8 smartphones. Quite crisp, clean visuals of that Ultra HD resolution, stable looking footage as well, and zooming by flicking to the different sensors is a fairly smooth experience. You've also got a triple mic setup on here, plus an audio zoom feature, which can focus on whatever the camera is aimed at, and apparently block out other sounds. It does slightly muffle background noise like wind, waves, etc. Although I wouldn't say it has a massive effect. But while the Reno 13 Pro doesn't have the same ridiculously good noise cancellation as the Fine X8 flagships, the audio capture is still nice and clear. And last up, around front, you've got yourself a 50 meg selfie shooter. Again, nice and crisp, bit too crisp in fact, but too much detail in general. But you can capture up to 4K resolution footage at 60 frames per second. Again, pretty stable as well, which is impressive stuff. And that audio capture, again, nice and crisp and clear, even with a fair bit of background action going on. And if you fancy a bit of stock Android action instead, and you're not too put off by the slightly patchy software updating, well, Motorola is another brand well worth checking out. And check out the Edge 60 Fusion, which is one of the most attractive mid-range smartphones around, complete with a strokeably soft rear end and even its own perfume. Just don't ask. Battery life is absolutely stellar, and Motorola has shoved on a few fresh AI features, which are quite promising, if also a little bit shonky in these early days. And that camera arrangement can capture some rather lush stills from your everyday existence. You can quick load the camera with a double push of that power button. And certainly from the specs, it appears like Motorola hasn't tinkered with the camera tech at all from the previous generation, but you do actually have different sensors in there. So it's a 50 megapixel primary shooter using Sony's IMX896, and then the only alternative lens is a 13 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter using a Galaxy core sensor. I have found that the camera app can be tediously slow at times. Not right now, of course. Now it's going to be absolutely perfectly behaved. But of course, you can guarantee the very second your kid or your cat does something really cute and you just quickly swap in between the different camera modes or camera sensors, it'll suddenly decide to take its sweet time. You've got the usual variety of modes and everything stuck on here. So you've got the obligatory portrait mode, you do have a pro mode where you can mess around with the likes of the white balance, the ISO levels, etc. And you can shoot in RAW format. And the likes of ultra res as well if you want to shoot in the full 50 megapixels. As in the regular photo mode, you are shooting 12 megapixel images by default. You've also got the choice of snapping natural looking images, otherwise turning on auto enhance, which is particularly handy for those high contrast situations. Enhanced mode does brighten up a pic, similar to what you'll get with iPhones and Samsungs. It can work pretty well for scenery shots and the like. In natural mode, the Edge 60 Fusion captures quite realistic tones, and even when the lighting is a bit cack, you shouldn't see too much noise infiltrating your photos. In fact, some of my HDR snaps came out much better than expected, while night shots again look pretty decent for a budget blower. And some of the portrait shots spaffed out by the Fusion are especially gorgeous. Natural skin tones and no overly enthusiastic edge smoothing, cracking stuff. And of course there's no optical zoom on offer here, but you can still digitally zoom a respectable amount before the detail levels become a bit murky. And that ultra-wide shooter is pretty good compared with many budget rivals. Again, dealing quite well with dodgy contrast and not mucking up those colours too bad. Now, no real surprises when it comes to the video action. You can record up to 4K resolution footage at 30 frames per second. If you want 60 frames per second, you'll have to knock the resolution down to full HD. Now, video output isn't quite as impressive as the photos coughed up by the Edge 60 Fusion. You can expect more noisy results and duller tones in lower light and with strong contrast. But still, stabilization is perfectly decent, so you can move around while you shoot. And the focus is reliable enough to stay trained on your subject, while audio capture is pretty clean as long as there's no unexpected gusts or anything. And then finally, for the camera shenanigans, you've got a 32 megapixel selfie shooter up front. And using that front-facing selfie cam, you can shoot up to 4K Ultra HD resolution video at 30 frames per second, no 60 frames per second option. But stabilization is pretty good. You can wander about and talk and shoot at the same time. No worries. And those mics do a pretty good job of picking up your voice. Not the loudest, not the cleanest, but not bad at all. Now, Xiaomi is also partial to coughing out the occasional excellent mid-range camera phone, and its latest effort is the 14T. Overlook the cheap feel and plastic design and instead admire that water-resistant finish, as well as the gorgeous AMOLED screen which supports both HDR10+ and Dolby Vision shenanigans. The Xiaomi 14T's performance is also as smooth as my bonds after a hearty scrub down with a block of lard. And that's thanks to MediaTek's Dimensity 8300 Ultra, plus a sizable stainless steel vapor chamber. And when you finally do drain the 5000 mAh battery, you're refilling with the pretty nippy 67 watt hypercharge action. As for the optics, well, Xiaomi has once again collaborated with Leica, with the usual eye-pleasing results. Now, that primary shooter is a Sony IMX906 sensor, 50 megapixels, again, just like the Light Fusion sensor stuffed into that Pro. And once again, quite natural looking photos spaffed out by this thing with some gorgeous crispy contrast, rather than the over-brightened shenanigans you'll get from the likes of an Apple. But of course, if you do prefer those brighter, poppier snaps where you can always turn on Leica Vibrant with a quick jab of that, and this does produce more iPhone-esque results. And like its Pro sibling, you've also got a 12 megapixel ultra-wide angle shooter, and the Xiaomi 14T sports a 50 meg telephoto snapper. Although not quite as powerful as that Pro effort, this does max out at 20 times combined zoom, and as usual you won't quite want to max it out because things get pretty fuzzy before then. You appear to have pretty much the exact same camera features and modes slapped on here as well, including a good bit of master portrait mode with the 4 focal lengths once again, so you can get it just right for your subject. When it comes to the video chops, things again quite complex. You can't shoot 8K video here on the Xiaomi 14T, unlike the Pro, but you can capture 4K footage at 30 or 60 frames per second, unless you chuck on the HDR mode, in which case you max out at 4K 30 frames per second. And then you've also, on top of that, got the likes of the Master Cinema mode if you're shooting in more HDR type scenarios. You've also got a movie mode, where as you can see there, you can automatically focus on a subject with a double tap of them. The focus will then lock on them, even if other people are wandering in and out of frame. And as if that wasn't enough, you've also got the director mode, which is basically a completely manual mode. As you can see there, it gives you access to a whole bunch of manual controls, including ISO level, shutter speed, white balance. So you can tinker with these to your heart's content. You've also got a whole bunch of on-screen shenanigans, including a histogram. See exactly how much battery life is remaining and how much footage you can shoot before your storage fills up. And then around the front end, you've got yourself a 32 megapixel selfie shooter. And using that front-facing camera, you can record up to 4K Ultra HD resolution footage at 30 frames per second. There's no 60 FPS option here. Isn't that right, buddy? Yes, right, isn't it, buddy? And like the Pro model, the audio pickup absolutely fine when you are recording a video. But if you are shooting outdoors, you want to make sure it's not too gusty, because that wind noise does get picked up pretty badly. And Xiaomi is also the mastermind behind this trio of Poco mid-range monsters, the F7 series. The regular Poco F7 is a lower mid-range wallet-friendly banger, while the Ultra is actually pushing into flagship territory at around double the price, with a Pro model sat nestled neatly in the middle, like a pepperami in a pepperami sandwich, or something. Battery life is sublime across the board, although you will want to go Pro or Ultra if you are a gaming fan, as the regular Poco F7 tends to get a wee bit toasty under pressure. Xiaomi's HyperOS software tends to be rather divisive, but as always, these Pocos deliver solid specs for a respectable asking price. You can see exactly how they shape up in my triple threat F7 comparison. As for those optics, well, the Poco F7 and the F7 Pro sport a dual lens setup, which is upgraded to a lovely posh triple lens arrangement on the Ultra. You got a 50 meg Light Fusion 800 sensor on the Pro and the Ultra versus another 50 meg Sony sensor on the F7, but it's the IMX882 here. Thankfully, that shutter speed nice and nippy on all three. And the results across the board are pretty good in both strong and dim lighting. Occasionally this trio can chuck out a duff shot for seemingly little reason, but you won't see much grain creeping into low light snaps, especially with the Pro and the Ultra, which use a larger sensor. And all three can cope pretty well with HDR type situations. The Ultra is the way to go though if you shoot a lot of portraits thanks to its dedicated telephoto lens, or you just like to zoom as it can capture stronger detail levels over a moderate distance. The majority of people should be happy with all three of these blowers. Got all the bonus camera modes you'd expect, including, yes, a dedicated Pro mode on all three. And if you swap to the video mode, where you can actually capture up to 8K resolution footage at 24 frames per second on the Pro and the Ultra, whereas the regular Poco F7 does max out at 4K resolution, but you can shoot at 30 or 60 frames per second on all three. And they certainly all do the job for your simple shareable home movies. Visual quality is excellent across the board, stabilization top notch. Audio pickup not too bad either. I have noticed on quite blustery days the F7 Pro and the regular F7 do tend to struggle a bit more than the Ultra, so if you do live somewhere a bit breezy, so maybe take that into consideration. And then it's a similar selfie cam setup on all three, although as you can see there, my t-shirt does look considerably more yellow here on the regular Poco F7 compared with the Pro and especially the Ultra, which seems to be saturating the hell out of it. But all three can capture full HD resolution footage. There's no 4K shooting in that front end with any of these F7 blowers. And if you want to know more about any of these blowers, why not have a gander at my individual Poco F7, F7 Pro and F7 Ultra reviews and take a closer look at the hardware, the software experience, and of course that camera tech. Bit more of an in-depth dive, or at the very least more waffle. And if you can actually find the bastards somewhere online, I would also merrily recommend the Vivo V60, especially if your face is constantly stuck in your smartphone, as the almighty 6500 mAh battery is one of the biggest around. That upgraded Snapdragon chipset means hardcore games like Wuthering Waves play rather nicely, while movie fans will also love that crisp poppy display. And Vivo has also bumped up the camera abilities for this generation, once again partnering with Zeiss for those optics. So it's another 50 megapixel primary shooter here on the Vivo V60, although that sensor has been swapped back to Sony from Omnivision, and they've gone with the ever reliable IMX766. And as usual, you have a choice of filters. As you can see, it's on the Zeiss Vivid mode by default. You can drop this down to the original. You've also got that texture mode on board. So you've got a variety of options. Then you've got like the stage mode, various other filters. And I prefer sticking with the natural Zeiss mode, though the Vivid mode quite handy for highlights and bright blue skies, making those visuals a bit more punchy if that's what you're into. And as always, the Vivo V60 impresses as far as mid-range snappers go, capturing plenty of detail, dealing with strong contrast, no worries, and even in low light type situations you won't see much in the way of grain. And speaking of low light scenarios, you've once again got that aura light slapped on the back. This is kind of a less harsh version of a flash, which is quite handy for low light portrait snaps. As you can see, you can tweak the color temperature between warm and cool, or you can just leave it on auto mode if you can't be bothered with that. And obviously different temperatures will suit different skin tones and different kinds of lighting. In my case, I think I just look pallid no matter what. Now, after chucking a 50 megapixel ultra wide angle shooter into the Vivo V50, this has been downgraded for the V60 to a more basic 8 megapixel shooter. So you won't get as much detail packed into every frame, and it's not quite as capable in lower light scenarios. But Sony has more than made up for this by slapping on a fresh new 50 megapixel telephoto shooter using the Sony IMX882 sensor. And you can actually zoom up to 100 times in total using the combination of that telephoto zoom and just digital shenanigans, but I wouldn't recommend getting anywhere near that cap unless you enjoy quite abstract images. But it's certainly a perfectly respectable mid-range zoom effort and a bit of a cracker for those portrait snaps. You got all the usual bonus Vivo modes chucked on here, including a dedicated manual mode as well, which allows you to shoot raw images so you can edit on the fly. You got full control over the likes of the focus, the shutter speed, the ISO levels. And you can shoot up to 4K resolution Ultra HD video using the rear cam setup on the Vivo V60. Although sadly it maxes out at 30 frames per second, there's no 60 frames per second option at 4K. God, I'm absolutely shagged out. I've only walked about half a mile. That's not good, is it? Stabilization's pretty good, as you can see, and audio pickup absolutely fine as well. And yes, as usual, there is a plethora of photo editing tools stashed on here as well, including the obligatory AI erase shenanigans, so you can get rid of any background stuff that happens to be lurking there. And poof, Chainsaw Man completely gone as if he never existed. And there you have it, my lovelies. That's what this bald northern prong reckons about the latest mid-range smartphones and which ones are best for the old camera tech. Now, we'll be reviewing plenty more mid-range smartphones in the coming month or so, including this bad boy right here, the Samsung Galaxy S25 FE, so that holds up. And of course, Xiaomi is launching its fresh new 15T smartphones imminently. So to be the first to see all that shenanigans, do all that YouTube poke subscribe, ding bell, etc. Please do check out my full reviews of all of these smartphones here on TechSpert if you want to know more. And if I missed out your own favourite mid-range camera phone, well, let me know what a massive twat I am down in the comments below. Oh, thank you, every goodbye, love you.